Good evening and welcome to the 172nd Annual Earl Marischal Debate. My name is Ross McNaughton and I will be your host for this evening. Traditionally, the Earl Marischal debates the motion, "This House has no faith in Her Majesty's government." However, in light of the upcoming Scottish parliamentary elections, we will be debating the motion, "This House has no faith in the Scottish government." I'm delighted to welcome 8 speakers from all across the political spectrum to speak here tonight. On side proposition, I'd like to welcome Neil Findlay, the Labour MSP for Lothian, Andrew Bowie, the Conservative MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, Molly Nolan, the Liberal Democrat candidate for Caithness, Sutherland and Ross, and Jamie Wallace, the President of Debater. On side opposition, I'd like to welcome Richard Thomson, the SNP MP for Gordon, Fatima Joji, the lead SNP candidate for the North East, Councillor Emma Roddick, the lead SNP candidate for the Highlands and Islands, and Jack Boag, the Secretary of Debater. Tonight's event will be in British parliamentary format. Each speaker gets 5 minutes to speak. The first and final minute will be protected, whilst the middle 5 will be open to points of information. Speakers will be in the order of proposition, opposition, proposition, opposition, and so on. I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker of tonight, Neil Findlay, the Labour MSP for Lothian. Formerly a bricklayer, housing officer and teacher, Neil became an MSP in 2011 and has been the convener for the Campaign for Socialism since 2015. Neil, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks very much, Ross, and speaking to you tonight, and indeed to move the motion before us that this House has no faith in the Scottish Government. And I move this motion not in a whim, nor just for the sake of academic debate, because I believe genuinely that if people put the SNP government and its record under scrutiny, it would be very difficult to come to any other conclusion. Now, I don't care particularly what the useless Tories or Liberals say in this debate. I will be prosecuting my case based on my socialist values and the need for a major reform of our economy and society so that it works not in the interests of private capital, big business and vested interests, but in the interest of working people, those people whose labour generates the wealth and taxes that allows our society to function. It's my view that public services are what civilises our society. The work done by binmen, by hospital cleaners, teachers, youth workers, homelessness officers is the very glue that holds our society together. Yet if we look in every corner of those public services, then we see that glue being picked away by cuts, bad policy making and sheer incompetence. In education, we see the attainment gap growing between children in communities like the one I live in and those in more affluent communities. We've seen budgets cut, classroom assistants lost and class sizes rising. In the NHS, the greatest ever social policy made by any government. We were told by Shona Robertson when she was Cabinet Secretary that she would eradicate waiting times in the NHS. In my Lothian region, and by 31st of December, 19,000 people were waiting over 39 weeks for treatment. They're supposed to have a legal treatment time guarantee of 12. Look at delayed discharge. Prior to COVID, we saw delayed discharge at record levels. Older people stuck in hospital up to a year, lied to as to the reason why they were stuck in hospital, told there was no social care place for them. Then overnight in April, 1,300 places became available overnight. Older people shipped out of hospital untested, my mum one of them, into these new magically care home places. How did that happen? Was it because we built all these bedrooms overnight and recruited all these staff overnight? Well, of course it wasn't. It was because these places existed all along. What happened was the IJBs and the councils were starved of funding. And they were left people stuck in hospital at £4,000 a week, left in hospital and lied to. Audit Scotland say that delayed discharge has cost £650 million of wasted money over the last 5 years. We've seen a human rights catastrophe in our care homes. Thousands of elderly people isolated, over PPE not supplied to those looking after them. Staff couldn't get tested, working under immense pressure. And remember, we were told in 2014 that Scotland had world-leading social care. World-leading social care run by the likes of HC1, based in the Cayman Islands, paying 48 million in dividends to its shareholders, paying zero corporation tax, and posting a loss every year. These chancellors should be run out of the country, never mind allowed to look after our older people. And I'm sure the politicians here will tell you they're seeing more constituents than ever seeking help for mental ill health. We have a mental health crisis. In my Lothian region, someone looking to see a psychologist will wait 24 months on treatment. If you're going through mental health crisis, you need help today, not in 24 months' time. And what about the drugs crisis? We have the worst drugs deaths crisis in the developed world. 1,300 of our fellow citizens dead, 4 times higher than the rest of the UK. And as those numbers were rising, the hapless minister in charge agreed to a 26% cut in the budget, directly resulting in people dying. We see the Sick Kids Hospital 6 years late, costing a 1.4 million a month. Climate change climate targets missed, recycling targets missed, education reports withheld, freedom of information requests blocked, Police Scotland on their 3rd chief constable, 1 in 4 children in poverty. Scotland has the highest life expectancy gap between rich and poor than any other nation. Men in the poorest areas, like where I live, living 13 years less than their affluent fellow citizens. Food bank use has soared. We can't even feed our own people in the 6th richest country in the world, and in a country where 1% of private households own more wealth than the 50% of the poorest households. What a scandal that is. In the economy, we have a ferries contract many years late and £130 million over budget. The Cllr Works closed after 140 years of engineering excellence. Bifab lying empty. People on the dole while turbines for the Fife Coast are built in Indonesia. Our councils have been starved of funds. 40,000 jobs have gone. As the wealthiest this year will receive £30 extra in a council tax freeze, and the lowest paid will receive the massive sum of 1 penny of benefit. And in the midst of a housing crisis, this year, the Scottish Government cut the affordable housing budget by £100 million. This is a government that never, ever accepts responsibility for its failings until it is shamed into doing so. It's always someone else's fault, whether that be councils, Westminster, the opposition, anybody except those who are in power and those who unquestionably and subserviently vote through these decisions week in, week out, year in, year out in the Parliament that I have just left. Now, I believe we need a different type of society, a different type of government, which values every human being, invests in our public services via progressive taxation, where the wealthiest pay their fair share, where tax-avoiding corporations receive no public funds or contracts, where we end the cuts to services, the services it civilises, where poverty is eradicated by a whole government approach, where we decriminalise drugs and treat people who are unwell, where our older people are treated with dignity and respect, not locked away and ignored, and where our young people can enjoy being young again, supported in their times of need, and enjoy an education system that gives everyone an opportunity. It is my view now more than ever, I've never believed this more in my life, that when the world is on the precipice of a disaster with climate change, where we see gross exploitation and inequality in our society and across the globe, the only way in which we can deal with this is not through free market capitalism. It's free market capitalism that's taken us to the disaster that we are in at the moment. Andrew's shaking his head. He would continue to burn every resource possible. He would continue to exploit people whenever he could in the pursuit of profit. That, to me, is a disastrous approach. And I've never more than now believed that we need a planned economy, that we need international cooperation, and we need solidarity. That's the way to a better future for Scotland, the UK, and indeed the world. Thank you very much. We have no faith in the Scottish Government.
Thank you very much for the opening proposition speech, Neil. We now move on to our opening opposition speaker for tonight, who is Richard Thomson, the SNP MP for Gordon. Richard is the former head of campaigns for the SNP, was the leader of the Aberdeenshire Council between 2015 and 2017 before becoming an MP in 2019. He is currently the SNP's Shadow Secretary of State for Wales and the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Richard, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ross. And can I say what a pleasure it is to take part in this 172nd annual Earl Marischal debate and to respond to the proposition that this House has no confidence in the Scottish Government. Now, having no confidence in the government, I would suggest, implies having at least some confidence in the opposition. But over the last few months, the official opposition in Scotland, the Conservatives, have been led by two politicians stuck in parliaments that neither of them wanted to be in. And Baroness Davidson has apparently got so much confidence in the Conservatives' ability to win an election in Scotland that she herself is off to the House of Lords. And we are in quite a remarkable situation that after 14 years of the SNP being in power, and for the second Holyrood election in a row, the people are once again on course to re-elect the government and sack the opposition. All of which rather begs the question of why, if the Scottish Government is doing such a poor job, why the principal parties of opposition are currently slugging it out for third place instead of making their pitches as governments in waiting. I think we need to ask ourselves why that is, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. The first of those reasons comes because we have a tale of two governments in their priorities and values respectively. People know the Scottish Government doesn't get everything right. We've had a list there from Neil which in some respects indicates as much. However, what people do trust is the willingness and the ability of the Scottish Government to do its best for those it represents, even through a period of prolonged Westminster austerity. And they're entirely unsurprised, in contrast, when the UK Government does its worst. This week, we saw the UK Government announce a 1% pay rise for the NHS staff who've worked so hard to take us through the pandemic. In contrast, in Scotland, NHS staff will get a 4% rise. This week, we also saw the Scottish Parliament vote unanimously to directly incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law. In contrast, at Westminster, we saw the UK Government announce its intention to spend hundreds of millions of pounds increasing the number of Trident warheads from 180 to 240. I'll take a point of information from Neil Findlay.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I wonder if you could address some of the points that are made in the litany of failures that the government has overseen.
I'll be glad to address them in open debate later, Neil. I want to make some progress, but I don't think that you can entirely divorce the powers and the resourcing of the Scottish Parliament from some of the decisions, some of the outcomes that you've been speaking about. The Scottish Government has put Scotland on the map, delivering many bold, progressive, world-leading policies, such as maintaining free tuition, free prescriptions, free personal care, free sanitary products, with world-leading climate targets, rebalancing income tax to shift the burden away from the lowest paid onto those who are better able to pay their share, an energy transition fund to drive the green recovery, free bus travel for under-19s, expanding that to under-22s, and the game changer, 600 hours of free high-quality childcare expanding to 1,140 hours. But how much more could be done if we were fully in control of our resources, instead of, as we've seen with the furlough scheme, having to wait for Westminster to reach the same conclusions for the rest of the UK before the necessary resource begins to feed through? I'll take a point of information from Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for giving way. I don't doubt that the Scottish Government has managed to achieve something in 13 years in office, but it would be remiss of I think anybody here not to point out that free sanitary products was actually a result of, I think, Labour a Labour push in the Scottish Parliament. Free travel was a proposition first from the Green Party. Free personal care was introduced under the first coalition government in the Scottish Parliament, and everything else you listed has come about in the last 1 month of this 13 years of SNP government, almost as if you were rushing policy through, so as if you had something to show for your 30 years of government ahead of this Scottish election. You cannot, Richard, argue for 1 minute that we should have a vote of confidence in this government. There's very little to commend the Scottish government for 13 years in office. You have to agree with me.
No, I don't. And I don't know if that intervention will come out your own speaking time, but certainly in terms of free personal care, there was free nursing care has been provided by the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Government has maintained these priorities throughout what has been one of the toughest lots of public spending rounds. And I think that it's rather churlish, Andrew, if you don't mind me saying so, not to acknowledge what has been done in order to maintain that. I think the other tale of two governments is that in Westminster we see leadership matters, and we see a profoundly unserious politician who has utterly debased the currency of truth and plain speaking in politics, who's blundered his way through the pandemic response and led us to a position where we are, through Brexit, increasingly isolated in political and trading terms from our closest allies in Europe, and where future generations to come will have fewer opportunities than their parents. In contrast, people in Scotland, whatever their views, can see a First Minister who knows her own fallibility, who doesn't pretend to get everything right, but who, in contrast to her counterpart in Downing Street, is mentally and physically present when the big decisions need to be taken, and who genuinely seeks to act in the best interests at all times of those she represents. So there can be no greater priority right now than to win the battle against the pandemic. However, afterwards, Scotland's recovery and the means of delivering that recovery needs to be in Scotland's hands, not Boris Johnson's. That means that the people of Scotland must have the right to decide their future in an independence referendum when the COVID crisis is over. Now, of course, the verdict that matters most is the verdict of the people of Scotland on the 6th of May. I believe now, more than ever, is a time for experienced leadership in government as we continue with the most important task we have of keeping Scotland safe. My party's campaign will be about raising up, not tearing down. It will be full of optimism and hope for a better Scotland. And over these next 6 weeks, we'll be setting out our plans to protect the NHS, for a national care service, and to protect and create jobs as we get on with the job of building a better Scotland. And that optimism, hope, and sense of possibility is founded on a total belief in the abilities and talents of all the people who choose to make their lives here. I share Neil's passion for a fairer society, but we also need to make sure we've got the democratic tools to deliver it and the resources to deliver it, more of those things rather than fewer. It's that faith in the future of Scotland to embrace it. That's why I'm confident that the people of Scotland will continue to demonstrate their confidence in the Scottish National Party government on the 6th of May. Thank you.
Thank you very much for opening the side of opposition, Richard. We now move on to our second proposition speaker of tonight, who's Andrew Bowie, the Conservative MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. Andrew is an alumnus of the University of Aberdeen and was the chairman of the university's Conservative and Unionist Association for the year 2012-2013. Elected as an MP in 2017, Andrew was the Parliamentary Private Secretary for the Prime Minister between 2018 and 19, and has been the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party since 2019. Andrew, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ross. It's a great pleasure to be back here, albeit virtually, at the 172nd Earl Marischal. It's been a highlight of the year since I was at university, as you so kindly remarked. It was quite a long time ago now, and I'm really honoured to be back. I feel almost though I might be like that old relative that turns up every year and you can't get rid of. But it is a great pleasure to be back. I must say one thing has changed since the last time I spoke, and usually, and I mean for many, many years, the motion before us tonight would read that this House has no faith in Her Majesty's government. The fact that we are debating instead as to whether we have any faith in the Scottish government obviously means that the members of Debater and University of Aberdeen have decided that they all have confidence in Her Majesty's government and the way that we are governing the entire United Kingdom at this time. But I would argue that we have no faith in the Scottish government. And I suggest that the members of Debater and people attending this evening should have no faith in them either. A failed, centralising, ideologically bankrupt, single-issue pressure group masquerading as a party of government. And I would argue that Scotland deserves much better. I think it's simply impossible to have faith in an executive that has failed so markedly, failed in education, the economy, on economic growth, failing Scots on jobs, failing Scots on the health service, failing Scots on drugs test infrastructure, failing Scots on broadband rollout, failing Scots on local funding. I don't know how anyone could have confidence in this party of government. I'll take a point of information from, I've got two, Neil Findlay and then Richard Thomson. I'll take them at the same time.
Yeah, it's only you can't offer points of information to your own side.
Oh, right, okay. And Richard Thomson.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wonder, Andrew, if you could remind us which government has responsibility for regulation over telecommunications and broadband, and if the Scottish government that we're invited to have no confidence in is doing such a rotten job, why is your party fighting for third place rather than first?
Well, Richard, on your first question, obviously the competencies for rolling out broadband and telecommunications network in the UK are shared between the UK and the Scottish government. If that wasn't the case, then why would the Scottish government have their R100 scheme, for which the minister in charge of it, Fergus Ewing, offered to resign if it wasn't successful by the end of 2021? Latest projections are that it won't succeed until 2026. And on the other point that you asked the question about, if you would just bide your time and be patient, I will expand my arguments as to why we should have no confidence in the 13 failed years of Scottish National Party government in Scotland. I mean, I want to look at the record of the Scottish government. Education, the attainment gap, wider now than when the Scottish National Party came into power. Kids from disadvantaged backgrounds less likely to get into university in Scotland than they are in England. And this was Nicola Sturgeon's top priority, she said when she became First Minister. Education was going to be the top priority. I'd hate to see what happens to priorities that are further down her list of things that she wants to deal with. Jobs in the economy, projected growth in Scotland of only 1.8% expected in 2022 post-pandemic, compared to a rate of 5% predicted from the rest of the UK, and a jobs growth rate less than the rest of the UK prior to the coronavirus pandemic. And health, an absolutely abysmal record on health. This 12-week treatment time guarantee, which was supposed to see every patient in Scotland seen within 12 weeks of going on a waiting list. On great fanfare by the First Minister when she was Health Secretary in 2011, has never once been met. We're expecting a shortfall of GPs in Scotland of about 856 by the end of this year. The disgrace, the absolute disgrace of deaths of patients at Glasgow's Queen Elizabeth Hospital due to failures in water quality and ventilation systems, and Edinburgh Royal Hospital for sick children. Delayed, and delayed again. Due to open in 2012. Let's just put 2012 into perspective here. At Aberdeen University, I was chairman of the University Conservatives in 2012. David Cameron was still Prime Minister. Barack Obama was still President of the United States of America. The United Kingdom was still in the European Union when this hospital was supposed to be opened. You know when it actually opened its doors to sick children in Edinburgh? 4 weeks ago, 9 years late. And whilst we're on health, as Neil Findlay has already pointed out, drugs deaths. Scotland has the highest drug death rate in Europe. Now, the SNP will say that they don't have the powers to deal adequately with issues surrounding misuse of drugs in Scotland. And there are powers that the Westminster government could use if it chose to address some of these issues. I accept that. And there's a debate ongoing within government now as to whether we should. But the SNP, the police, they are in charge of public health. They are in charge of local government. They have all the powers needed to act on drugs deaths. Instead, what did they do when they were in power? Well, whilst they were still in power, they withdrew the number of drugs rehab beds in Scotland. What a disgrace. New ferries unfinished on the slipways. Look, this is not a debate. Richard raised independence and the power of Scotland to determine the future. This evening's debate is not a debate about independence. It's not a debate about where you think the constitutional future of the United Kingdom lies, or where you think the powers should lie to make Scotland a better place for all of us. And of course, all of us want to see a better future for this whole country. This is about whether you have confidence in this Scottish government. You can believe that Scotland should be independent. You can believe that Scotland should remain in the United Kingdom. But I put it to you that you should support the motion in front of us. You cannot have confidence, no matter your opinion on independence or remaining in the United Kingdom, in this government. Why should anybody here have confidence in the Scottish government when the former leader of that very government has today said he's got such little confidence in it, he has founded his own political party to stand candidates in the upcoming Scottish election? Look, in 41 days, all of Scotland will have the opportunity to express its confidence in this government. Sadly, this is likely to be overshadowed yet again by a debate on the Constitution, as every election in Scotland seems to have been since 2014. But tonight, you, the students of Scotland's finest higher educational establishment, have the opportunity to put that issue to one side and decide on its own whether you think this government deserves to have a vote of confidence or whether it does not have our confidence. And for all the reasons I have given above, and more, which we'll hear as we go through the evening, I would suggest that we simply cannot have confidence in this Scottish government.
Thank you so much for the second proposition speech of the night, Andrew. We now move on to our second opposition speaker of tonight, Fatima Joji. Fatima is top of the list for the SNP for the North East. She is an alumnus of Robert Gordon University and the University of Birmingham, where she read journalism and international development, respectively. Fatima, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and this is my first ever 172nd annual Marischal debate, so I am really delighted to be here for the first time. And for such an easy to that it will be so easy for me, where I will make the case that we do have faith in the Scottish government. So just to address some of the points that have been said previously, I'll pick up Andrew Bowie's one first of all. The 12-week treatment time apparently has never been met. Well, over 2 million inpatients and day cases have benefited from the 12 weeks treatment time guaranteed since it was introduced, with 85.9% being seen in 12 weeks. Again, 45,564 treatment time guarantee patients have been seen, up from the previous quarter. 38,000. Yeah, I can keep going with these statistics, but it's just to, I'm just here addressing facts with Andrew's inaccuracies. And again, our economy. Andrew, you mentioned that our economy is failing. Well, may I add, to help protect jobs, and what I would mention, through Tory austerity, the Scottish government slashed or abolished business rates for over 117,000 premises, saving small businesses and around 2 billion today. This is amidst Tory austerity, which has made it very difficult. And in 2015, Scotland became the first government in the UK to become an accredited real living wage employer. That's a government I'm putting my faith in, that's there for the workers. And Scotland is this top destination in the UK outside of London for foreign direct investment. And just before I start my point, children from disadvantaged backgrounds in schools and not making it in, but a record 260,490 students enrolled at Scottish universities in 2019 and 2020. And the latest statistics from the Higher Education Agency show we have met key commission on widening access targets to have 16% of students from the most deprived areas of Scotland by 21. Now, on to my main points. As my colleague Richard Thomson mentioned, this is indeed a tale of two governments. And for me, it's one I can put my faith in, and then there's one that we can't. One that has given us progressive policies, equality of opportunity, such as free education, access to healthcare, free prescriptions, like my colleague Richard Thomson has pointed out, and one that has imposed damaging ones that we did not vote for. I can put faith in a government that prioritises measures that reduce poverty and inequality and increase welfare over one that prioritises nuclear weapons and measures that see a cut to welfare, such as the austerity. Andrew and Neil, you've talked a big game about the poverty situation in Scotland and how it has failed. Well, there is a reason that progress on poverty is more likely. There is a reason that progress out of poverty is more likely in Scotland with the Scottish government than the rest of the UK, bar Ireland. And I'm going to cite a report by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that showed that someone in Scotland and England can earn the same, have the same level of education, but lower rents in the social housing sector, and Scotland having a higher proportion of social means the person in Scotland is less likely to be in poverty. The report also shows that actions by the Scottish government, such as building nearly 90,000 affordable homes for more than a decade, child poverty legislation, we are seeing measures such as child payments, the baby box, expansion of free childcare, and we didn't have to fight so hard for free school meals like what we saw in Westminster, which is laughable. You had to have a football player literally begging for that. So the Scottish government has clearly considered being proactive and enforced poverty and inequality reducing measures, despite what I will say austerity cuts enforced by Westminster. To me, the Scottish government is a government that has done more to address poverty and inequality, including being the first to support a free period products bill in Parliament. Something that the UK government, when are you going to bring that up? I don't know. And the impact of Brexit, with exports from the UK to the EU falling by 68%. Another thing that we did not vote for, that we have been fighting against, We lose from Erasmus, which I will mention that the speaker before me, Andrew Bowie, could not deny on live TV the impact of Erasmus will have on our young people, robbing them of opportunities. And Brexit has sold out the fishing industry as well. And the Scottish government has opposed all this. It was the UK government that enforced this. I know where I can put my faith in. The Scottish government has delivered during the pandemic response, being Nicola Sturgeon, where the polls are showing that the Scottish government, led by Nicola, is more trusted to lead our recovery from the coronavirus than the Westminster government under Boris Johnson, who sees as something that he will decide to put the economy first rather than the lives of the people. I think I'd rather put my faith in a government that considers my life as more beneficial, as more important than the economy, using prioritizing schemes that seem to pump more money into the economy for their rich friends rather than actually extending the furlough scheme. So to me, those are facts that I consider. And if you want to talk about fair, if you want to talk about a government that's progressive, if you want to talk about one that has its, to me, that is the Scottish government. So that's all I'll have to say for my time. And thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for the second opposition speech of the night, Fatima. We now move on to our third proposition speaker of tonight, Molly Nolan. Molly is the Liberal Democrat candidate for Caithness, Sutherland and Ross. She is an alumnus of Harvard University, where she read history. Molly, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ross, and good evening, everyone. It's a joy to be here with you all this evening, and it's an honour to be debating with such a fine group of people on both sides of this House. I've long taken pride in my own cross-party allegiances. I firmly believe we all have more in common than what divides us. And I'm pleased to see some familiar faces this evening. And I'm even pleased to see Neil Findlay. I enjoyed hearing his words, even if he's disinterested in mine. I'm only sorry that we're not together in Aberdeen for this occasion. Instead, you'll have to put up with my intermittent Highland broadband, for I too am a victim of the botched R100 rollout. I am proud to call Scotland my home. I'm proud to live in a pluralist country where multiple identities are celebrated. I'm a Highlander, I am Scottish, I am Irish, I am British, I am European. And like so many this evening, I'm also a child of devolution, only slightly older than the Scottish Parliament itself. So it pains me that over 2 decades on from that ambitious move to bring power closer to the people, that the Scottish government is now letting us down as badly as it is. Power is not closer to the people in Scotland, it has moved further away. Today, we live in one of the most centralised countries in the world, under a Scottish government that is driven more by the desire for division than it is for evidence-based policymaking. My rural constituency has been ravaged of jobs and economic prosperity by a government hell-bent on moving public services further and further away from the people that they are meant to serve. Many policies are increasingly unworkable in rural areas, and indeed many rural people feel that their voices are not being heard. A laundry list of failures characterise the Scottish government nationally: chronically underfunded local authorities, the delayed R100 broadband rollout, land hegemony, an appalling record on drug deaths, fuel poverty rife across Scotland, hospitals that sit empty, a bridge that cannot handle icy weather, the lack of support for BIFAB, and a complete inability to get a handle on the chronic housing shortage in our country, to name just a few. Yes, Emma, take your point of information.
Thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on your point about hospitals lying empty, I wonder if you think it would have been more competent to not build the hospital in the first place?
I think it would have been more competent to build one that was in budget and had been opened, not 9 years late. Thank you for that. So one of the most stunning failures, I believe, under the Scottish government has been education, where standards have plummeted under Curriculum for Excellence. And indeed, in 2015, Nicola Sturgeon told us to judge her on her education record. And I would love to, but she won't release the data to allow us to do so. So according to the judgment of Audit Scotland this week, the Scottish government's performance on education is limited and falls short. The First Minister said she would close the poverty-related attainment gap completely, but that was 6 years ago. And at this rate, it will take us 35 years to have equity in Scotland. Let me also turn to healthcare. Under the legal treatment time guarantee was breached a further 37,230 times between March and December 2020. And before that, before the pandemic, it was being broken 6,000 times a month. So I'm not sure why people would argue that that's been a success. In my post bag, I receive emails from those who are waiting years for mental health support, including children, people surviving on one lung, people who have received cancer diagnoses too late. And ultimately, and most heartbreaking, I receive emails from those who have lost their loved ones due to an underfunded healthcare and social care system. How anyone could prioritise a referendum over fixing this fully devolved system is truly beyond me. The needle-sharp focus on recovery that Scotland needs and deserves is lacking. Instead, we are stuck between a rock and a hard place between two governments that have both been in power for too long, two governments that prioritise peddling nationalism, whether red, white and blue or blue and white. As the saying goes, you cannot eat a flag. Neither of these governments are standing up for Scotland's interests, for its needs, or for the priorities of those who matter most, the Scottish people. The binary choice that the SNP and the Conservatives have set up for us this evening is an utterly false one. We deserve much better. To conclude, let me say this to my colleagues on the other side of the House. A government success by simply pointing to the failures of another, as happens so often in this country. We must hold ourselves and our government in Scotland to a higher, more ambitious standard, rather than comparing ourselves to a British government that is also failing. It's not only unproductive, it's negligent. By going down that road, we find ourselves in a race to the bottom, and Scotland cannot afford to be dragged down any further. The SNP might have a slick PR machine, but it has failed the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the third proposition speech of the night, Molly. We now move on to our third opposition speaker of tonight, Emma Roddick. Emma has been a councillor on the Highland Council for Inverness Central since 2019 and is standing top of the list for the SNP for the Highlands and Islands. Emma, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak here tonight. It's great. I think it's clear from some of the remarks that have been made from the proposition today that this motion is a lie. I'm not sure that they even believe it. This has been an excuse for scoring party political points without the need to actually bother talking about their own policies. Mr. Findlay's opening remarks made that entirely clear. He said he didn't even care what arguments his colleagues had to make. In fact, he distanced himself from them. He just wanted to make it about attacking the SNP. Now, the Tories, Liberal Democrats and Labour coming together to try and say there is no confidence in a government which has shown time and time again that it is trusted by the public serves only to uncover their true motivation, which is to try and throw dirt at a government which is showing them up. But despite their tired and continuous attacks, their mud is not sticking. A Scottish Social Attitude Survey published last year showed that 61% of people trusted the Scottish Government to work in their best interests. Now that's compared to 15% for the UK Government. 73% thought that we should have more say than the UK Government in how the country is run. Claiming no confidence in a government which commands a 46-point lead over its UK counterpart, which is led by Mr. Bowie's party, is complete nonsense. Now, speaking of Mr. Bowie, he didn't accept my points of information earlier, so I'm going to respond to them now. I wonder if he would have more confidence in a government such as the UK one, which can't admit its own mistakes and seek to rectify them. He mentioned the Edinburgh Sick Kids Hospital. The Health Secretary made the decision to delay that opening for the sake of patients and their families. A public inquiry is ongoing to determine how the issues occurred and with a view to preventing them from happening again. He mentioned the drug deaths. This Scottish Government now has a ministerial position dedicated solely to developing drug policy and tackling harm from misuse. The mark of good governance is not that nothing bad ever happens in the country, it's that you tackle the issues, and that is what the Scottish Government is doing. I will take a point of information from Mr. Findlay.
Thanks very much. Seriously, you don't expect us to cheer the fact that after all these years of budget cuts and drug deaths 4 times the size of the rest of the UK, we're supposed to cheer that you got rid of a duff minister and put a new one in. And when you raise the point about dirt being thrown at the government, I might suggest that the person who's been throwing the most dirt at the government over the last 6 months. Mr. Salmond and his colleagues.
I'm not sure entirely how that last point is relevant, but my issue with the arguments you're making is so removed from the fact that this is a motion about having no confidence in the government. And you can disagree on policy, you can disagree on what ministerial positions exist, but the fact is that if you want to go down that road, your party is refusing to put a motion of no confidence into the UK government, which has breached the ministerial code on countless occasions and been proven to in the last few months. So to go back to the motion at hand, this year, a poll conducted by YouGov showed that the trust in Scottish government coronavirus restrictions is still rising from 67 to 76% over the course of the last 4 polls. Now, while the Prime Minister has missed 5 consecutive COBRA meetings at the outbreak, our First Minister led daily briefings through the pandemic with BSL interpreters present. While the UK government claimed it wasn't possible, and that contrast in consistency and accessibility of messaging has no doubt contributed to the massive show of trust that we see in the Scottish Government COVID guidance. And transparency will also have played a part. The UK government tried to hide vaccine supply figures behind spin, and the Scottish Government has published them. The UK government awarded over £10 billion in tender, and SNP representatives introduced a bill which would force ministers to answer questions about any connections they have to a company which is awarded a government contract. Trust in the Scottish Government has been key in ensuring that public health advice over the last year has been followed. To try and undermine that without good reason while we are still navigating our way out of this pandemic is irresponsible. Now, the confidence in this government is going to be tested at the ballot box in 6 weeks' time. And I think that voters will see this desperate last-minute politicking for what it is. In her statement before successfully seeing off the last frivolous vote of no confidence, our First Minister invited those who wanted to see her removed to do it at an election. So I'm going to finish by echoing that sentiment. If you want to remove this Scottish Government, have the guts to fight May's election and give the public a reason to put you there instead. The absence of such a reason is conspicuous with only 42 days to go. I have confidence in the Scottish Government, and I have confidence that the public will continue to display the same. So colleagues, please oppose this motion.
Thank you so much for the third opposition speech of the night. We now move on to our final proposition speaker of tonight, Jamie Wallace. Jamie is a final year student at the University of Aberdeen reading History and International Relations. Jamie is the former president of the Aberdeen University Liberal Democrats and is currently the president of Aberdeen Debater, having been the equity officer last year. Jamie, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Right, first of all, thank you very much to Ross for hosting this evening, the subcommittee who helped me plan it, and the overall Debater Council for a very difficult year, especially a weird one in which I've never actually seen them all in person at the same time, which is an odd one, but there you go. But also a massive thank you to the speakers here tonight for coming along. You don't know how much this means to when politicians come to speak at a university. It really, really makes a difference. So thank you. Tonight will be my final speech at Debater. Sad, yes, but nonetheless happy after a fun 4 years, and especially ending with Earl Marischal, speaking in such a prevalent and relevant debate to our times in Scotland and the UK. Firstly, my speech will be laying out the failings of the Scottish Government over their time in power, as the role of proposition this evening is to highlight the failures of the Scottish Government, the governing party of the day. Mainly, I'll be laying out my summary in what the previous speakers of my side have said. That is one of the big problems of speaking last, but I will be highlighting education, infrastructure, and I'll move on halfway through. Remember, before hearing this next bit, that the SNP have been in power since 2007. Firstly, I, as a student, the student speaker on this side of the House, have no faith in the Scottish Government due to their mess in education. I don't need to add much to the previous speakers on proposition because they summed it up exactly. This government does not value education in a country that's produced so many educational greats. We are really letting ourselves down now. Education has been a way to lift so many people out of poverty within our country and worldwide. And the position of free university students, free university for Scottish students is the exact kind of thing that we should be pushing for. But this government has not put it into early years. Now, I'm born in '98. just after the Blair election, and New Labour policies were really, really helpful for me growing up in London and my friends. But my family in Russia and Lothian, they didn't get that to the same extent as we did back there. It's a massive problem. Yeah, I was lucky. I continue to be shocked at the dismissal of early years education and the overall centralisation of education away from regional councils, language being one of the big factors. It's a betrayal to students and parents and teachers in a year in which they need us so much. Also, I, as the student speaker on this side of the House, have no faith in the Scottish Government due to their blatant ignorance surrounding infrastructure in Scotland, where a north and south and a city divide grows more prevalent every time another budget passes Holyrood. This is mainly down to central beltism, which I do think plagues the SNP, and this can be actually seen in the A9, the artery to the Highlands for many. This, whilst being an environmental factor, is an important issue that this government has not taken seriously. Infrastructure should be green, but infrastructure should also stop congestion, accidents, and allow the Highlands and Islands to open up to Scotland. As for too long, anything north of Perth has been dismissed by this government. Further to this, as somebody who doesn't drive, I rely heavily on rail infrastructure to get around Scotland, seeing family in Russia or friends in Edinburgh and Glasgow. It's a sad sense of humour that the SNP have nationalised ScotRail when an election is around the corner. Like many other policies, this government has no interest in helping Scotland until it wants Scotland's help to re-elect it. It's an abuse of power from a sad state of the executive. Finally, I want to dwell on housing. The property ladder all over the UK is obviously clogged up. Sadly, many families are living in flats and can't afford to move to houses due to stagnant wages and the affordability of housing across this country. This could be good news if the SNP do stick to this 100,000 houses by 2032. However, this government has failed on so much, I don't see why we should now put faith in them to go forward when time after time they have proved to fail in the past, as cited every other proposition speaker has stated. This mainly comes from, I think, an austerity model which the SNP have been following because it's been easy to pass it up the chain to Westminster. Now, Westminster's no angel in this situation, but the SNP are playing the same tune. I don't think it's appropriate. Remember what I said before about the failings of this government? I mentioned that the SNP have been in power since 2007. Well, power, going back to its pure root in Latin, patare, means to be able. Surely a government in power would be able to lift children out of poverty. Surely a government in power would be able to invest in the regions properly. Surely a government in power would be able to govern for all of Scotland, rather than have the audacity to lie, point blame, and cover up into its 14th year. Independence is the only goal of this government, and it is not right when there are major issues in its place. Moving on to the second part, why you should have no faith in this government and governments like it, is a bit of a shout out to the history people on the panel tonight. In 1789, there was a very important revolution in the way that we see the modern system of governance and ideology in democratic societies. The French Revolution of 1789 was a bit of a bloody mess in both senses of the words, but it came out with 4 leading ideologies. Liberalism, the idea of freedom from the state to live your life as you only see fit, because it is not for others to judge the way that they live their lives. This has been expressed on the proposition side of the panel tonight, but has been attacked by members of the governing party, the SNP. Egalitarianism came in the collective action and bargaining and changes the way we were governed. This comes in union, fair wages, social security that keeps people from falling on such hard times. This has been expressed by members of the proposition tonight, but has been attacked by the governing party, the SNP. Conservatism, largely a revolution, has had the idea of gradual change smoothly in society and the way that the constitution works. This has been expressed on this side of the House and on the panel tonight, but has been attacked by members of the governing SNP. Now, the revolution also arises in nationalism through devotion to the nation. This is the one I personally fear the most. It's not patriotism, it is nationalism. It thrives on creating the other. This is a big problem. The devaluation of people for their political people being devaluated by fanatics of a political movement is dangerous. Now, I'm not saying side opposition is this at all, but the bedfellows that people make throughout politics is a dangerous one. And I do think that some of the allies, actually this part of the speech is a bit difficult because this all got ruined by Alex Salmon today, but you see where I'm getting at. This idea. Finally, I want to end this speech on a message of hope. Tonight, I believe we as side proposition have explained well why we should have no faith in this Scottish government or a government like this. Hopefully, I've conveyed why you can have no faith in a government like this again. So please do vote whichever way you want to on the 6th of May. But there are other options for us in Scotland that offer hope. And as for hope, as Charles Kennedy said, it requires purpose, and purpose requires direction. And I, for one, don't see direction in this government. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, debater. Good night.
Thank you so much for the final proposition speech of the night, Jamie. We now move on to our final speaker of tonight, an opposition, Jack Boag. Jack is a third-year student at the University of Aberdeen, reading History and International Relations, and is the Secretary of Aberdeen Debater. As a competitive debater, Jack broke as a speaker at the Pro-Am final of the 2021 Utrecht Open and as a judge to the Open final of the 2021 Aberystwyth Open. He is the former National LGBT+ Officer for the Federation of Student Nationalists for the year 2018-19 and the former National Treasurer of Out for Independence for the year 2019-20. Jack, you have 7 minutes whenever you're ready.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for what was an absolutely wonderful debate, and it's my absolute pleasure to close this off. It's on both sides of the house, the discussion has been incredibly civil, and is the constructive discourse that I hope that we actually move forward to in terms of our wider politics. Okay, so I think that one of the kind of basics of debating is that when you as a proposition side want to point out things that are wrong, you need to propose an alternative. And at the moment, it seems to me that at the very least, a large number of political parties in Scotland, and in particular the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, have mainly not actually proposed any alternatives to the Scottish government other than to stop the SNP and to stop IndyRef 2. While this debate specifically has been very engaging with the policies of the government, where they are successful and where they fall, that is not necessarily applied to wider discourse, and from there it ends up being quite it ends up being a shouting match where both sides complain that the other one makes it all about independence, and we don't actually have a discussion about the about policies. Now, I think that when the SNP were re-elected to government in 2016, I don't think that they could really have envisaged that the government and that Brexit and would have ended up being the market things that you would have ended up taking. Molly, I'll take you.
Thanks very much. You mentioned that there are two sides. Do you believe there's only two sides in Scottish politics?
No, I don't believe that there's two sides in Scottish politics. I think that I do, however, think that parties, that in particular, it seems that in the dominating discussion, you can end up just having two. End up having two sides, and that's bad. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that. Now, this was meant to come later in my speech, but because it actually directly responds to what you just said, I'll talk about it even more. So I think that when we're in a position of like minority governance, that can end up actually being quite good for the country, because you end up having relatively constructive discourse, because the government is in turn forced to negotiate with opposition parties in order to create budgets that they mutually believe deliver for the country. Now, with the notable exception of the Liberal Democrats, with the notable exception of the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, we've notably seen an opposition that would, rather than negotiate with the government in good faith in order to implement their policies, we've just seen lines about the Constitution being rattled out here, there, and everywhere, and that doesn't actually produce anything healthy, because it reduces discussions about policy into just what constitutional side that you're on. Okay, so this back to kind of where I was going to start at. So, Brett, I think that when the UK voted to leave the EU, there was a notable refusal from the UK government and from political parties outside of the SNP generally to accept that Scotland as a voting bloc unanimously voted one way in direct opposition to how the wider vote went. Now, what that means, or what that should have meant, is that some form of constructive solution for Scotland in a way that would have been happy for both the Scottish government and the UK government should have been negotiated, so that could then be proposed to the European Union. However, the UK government has no interest in doing this because they and remained intransigent when that happened. I think this also sort of applies to the drugs desk crisis. I'm not trying to pretend that the SNP and this government are completely in the right when it comes to the drugs desk crisis. However, there does definitely need to be some constructive discourse in terms of what are the Scottish government's responsibilities, what are the UK government's responsibilities, and where can they come together in order to create a definitive solution to what might end up being the biggest crisis of my generation and the biggest crisis of our times outside of Brexit, outside of COVID. Now back onto COVID. I think that I'm not trying to pretend that the Scottish government got everything right. However, the Scottish government is a government that is relatively willing to put its hands up and say we did wrong. We're going to have an inquiry. We're going to investigate how we did wrong so that we can therefore make it right. And I think that therefore right. And we need to make sure that that process is engaged with so that we can then work out where did we go wrong? Where did we go right? How do we improve? And say, for example, stuff to do with public infrastructure. I don't necessarily think that Jamie is right when he says that the SNP have completely ignored north of Perth. If the SNP was completely ignoring north of Perth roads considering he brought the A9, why would an SNP government, if they ignored north of the Central Belt, want to build the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route? If the SNP were ignoring the Central Belt, were ignoring north of Perth, why would they want to dual the A96? Yes, Andrew, I'll take you.
Thank you very much, Jack. I feel bad because Neil Findlay had a point of information in before, but I will take your kindness and go with it. On the AWPR was in the pipeline for a very long time. It was actually first proposed under the Labour and Liberal Democrat coalition government in Holyrood. And as for the dualling of the A96, it's now being delayed again. Our point is that if there are infrastructure projects in the Central Belt, they get to go ahead and seem to be built immediately, whilst in the northeast of Scotland, we have to wait year after year after year for funding to be spent up here.
I don't think that's necessarily true. In that the concept of an Aberdeen, of some form of bypass covering the city of Aberdeen, had been in the works for 50 years or whatever, and it came through across the devolution era, and in spite of things like the collapse of Carillion, which is something that I don't think the Scottish government could have particularly envisaged, that's naturally going to cause delays. That's naturally going to cause budgetary issues. So I don't think it's necessarily true that the Scottish government ignores these things. And in particular, when it comes to the building of infrastructure, the Scottish government are still facing the consequences of PFI contracts that were signed by the previous Labour Liberal Democrat executive, and the move away from those PFI contracts is naturally going to make infrastructure projects more expensive in the short term, but it means that we're not actually paying out of our own pockets. No, you're back into protective time. Okay, so what have I told you today? I've talked about why there is a lack of alternative being proposed on side proposition. I've talked about why the Scottish government has the ability to put its hands up and say that it got wrong. That is a good thing for discourse, and it is a good thing for wider society, and it also means that we can learn from our mistakes. And if we have a government that learns from our mistakes, that's going to be a government that acts in the interests of the people of Scotland, which I think the SNP have done, both since 2007 and since 2016. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jack, for what is the final opposition speech of the evening. And thank you very much to all of the speakers tonight for what has been a good and spirited debate. Now we move on to the vote. Given that this is a live stream, we will be using a different mechanism than normal to count votes. So those of you in our Facebook audience will vote. When I say so, please comment yes or no, aye or nay, or a clear expression of support or opposition into the live stream comments, and we will count them. There is a delay of around 10 seconds to this live stream, so everyone please vote all at once, starting now, and we will count them. And now we sit in awkward silence as the stream catches up with the outside world.
This is usually the stage that you start passing out free glasses of wine and nibbles and all the rest of it. It's usually the best point in the evening, guys. I don't know if we're expecting that to appear virtually now, or
I mean, we're saving up for a big party next year.
Very good.
Yes. Hopefully it'll make the next gathering in the hallowed halls of the old Senate room a little bit better.
Good.
All right, I think we should cut off the voting around there. So if our Aberdeen Debater mathematicians work out the results.
So I make it in the Facebook live stream 16 to the nays, 12 to the ayes. Is that agreed? So the nays have it.
Opposition has won. Congratulations, opposition. And also a nice little medal or Comic Sans certificate saying congratulations to side proposition for putting up a very worthy fight. Before we conclude proceedings, we're going to have a very brief Q&A section with the politicians and candidates. So I'm going to start with Neil. Neil, you're the convener for the Campaign for Socialism. With socialist goals in mind, what do you think Scotland's future relationship with the EU should look like?
Well, I voted for Remain against probably much of what I've believed in all my life. I've never been a great fan of the European Union, but I ended up voting Remain at the last minute, and I was influenced very much by one Mr. Nigel Farage and his racist campaign that he ran, and I could not end up voting on the same side as that man, and that was just abhorrent. And however, I'm very much a critic of how the EU has operated, and particularly the economic policies of the European Union. So I want to see a different Europe. I want to see a different world. I think we look at the way the European Union has worked. We have mass youth unemployment across the European Union. We have huge levels of unemployment in places like Italy and Spain and Croatia and the like. The European Union has, of course, done many good things, but I think the sort of fanaticism that has developed that says that everything that the EU does is good is frankly, I think, insulting, and people should look much more closely at what the European Union does. And I don't say that from the perspective, probably the view that people like Andrew take, certainly not the Boris Johnson view of the world. That is just not where I am. I want to see a people's Europe where countries cooperate in solidarity, and where we have economic policies across the EU that create full employment, that end the nonsense of Scottish companies unable to secure contracts and the like. So I think it's a very different Europe I want to see.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to Richard. So today it was announced that in 2020, renewables met 97% of Scotland's electricity demand. What more do you think that the Scottish Government can do to address the climate crisis?
I think that's a great question. I think it's worth taking time just to go back over that figure, that we actually met 97% of our domestic and, I believe, also our industrial need for electricity through renewables. Now, many years ago, it was thought that was an unachievable target. I remember when I was a councillor in Aberdeenshire sitting through planning applications for wind turbines, and it was a pretty tortuous process, but every single one has in the end contributed towards maintaining aspects of the rural economy where it's been those ones, but it's contributed to that wider goal. Now, I have to say, I've got an intrinsic bias towards renewable energy. My father was an electrical engineer at Cruachan Power Station in Argyll, and he made in there. So if it wasn't for hydropower stations, I probably wouldn't be here. But I think that there's a great deal more that we should be doing. I mean, we had the hydrogen economy is going to be absolutely vital, and I would really love to see Scotland being leading and taking a good industrial strategy in terms of pushing on and that developing and industrialising that technology instead of we could have industrialised the onshore wind opportunities and we didn't. So I hope that with this opportunity coming and we've got good sight of it, I hope we can drive forward in that. There's other things that it's important to do, like the decarbonisation of rail. You know, that's going to particularly have an impact north of Perth through electrification and all the rest of it, since that's our geographical point of reference for the evening, clearly. I think that, you know, decarbonising rail is going to be very, very big. It's about decarbonising heating and transport. Those are the next big things. But I think, and Neil will maybe like this, it needs that kind of spirit of this is something that shall be done and we shall go and do it. And I think that's been missing for a while. It was the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board was what really set us down the road to embracing renewable energy, even though we didn't really recognise it at that time. It was a Labour Secretary of State for Scotland, Tom Johnson, who used all the powers of his office to drive that for power to the Glens. And it's that same sort of purpose that we need. We've got a different mixed economy now than we had immediately post-war, but that's the sort of unity of purpose that we're going to need if we're going to get the full advantage and industrial benefits out of the hydrogen economy that's coming. And we're particularly well placed to do that in the Northeast if we start doing the right things about it.
Thank you very much for that very detailed answer. So now for Andrew. Aberdeen is an important hub for the whole of the north of Scotland, and recently John Lewis announced its closure of its department store in Aberdeen. I, for one, am very sad. In what way should a future Scottish government invest in the city in order to support communities in the north of Scotland, not just including Aberdeen?
Well, Ross, that's a really good question, and there's a lot of people hurting in Aberdeen and in the wider region at the minute, especially at the news of John Lewis closing, but not just at that. I mean, I'm sure Richard will agree with me as an MP in the northeast of Scotland over the past year. It's been, you know, incredibly difficult to see the amount of emails coming in from people looking for support either for their business to keep the doors open, keep people employed, people looking for furlough to see how they can keep paying the bills and put food on the table of their families over what has been an incredibly difficult period. So I think it's going to take both the Scottish government and the UK government to look at what we can do to invest in all of our regions. That's actually one of the reasons why the UK government is so keen on its levelling up agenda. We're determined that when we come through this terrible period that we're living through right now, that we do end up investing in our nations and regions. That's one of the reasons why we saw the £16 billion transition deal, which will benefit the North East of Scotland. We've just been talking about energy transition and moving towards a renewables future. We absolutely need to invest in developing our manufacturing industries to take advantage of the huge influx that we will be having and investment that we will be having in renewable technologies in this part of the world. We're seeing over 40,000 jobs saved in Aberdeen and the North East. And I want to see us go further. I want to see us work with the oil and gas companies that are already established here, are already providing employment. If they move away from purely focused on fossil fuel exploitation, developing our renewable and our carbon capture and storage capabilities. I think that's what the UK government should be doing, working with alongside the Scottish government. We also see movement in terms of, you spoke about John Lewis specifically. We need to have a wholesale review of how business rates operate. The last review of the business rates in the North East of Scotland was back in 2014, and I just think that we need to be very, very focused on how we support businesses in our part of the world, but not just our part of the world, how we support businesses across Scotland and the rest of the kingdom, how we help them grow post what has been probably for the economy since the end, certainly since the end of the Second World War.
Thank you very, very much for that, Andrew. So, Fatima, you've spoken publicly about the lack of diversity and lack of representation in the Scottish Parliament, government even, I should say. What solutions do you see achieving a more diverse and representative Scottish Parliament and government?
Well, thank you for that, because that is a really important question, considering me and my friend, we like talking about this all the time, considering that we do live in a postmodern capitalist economy, and that's based on the representative democracy principle. And if you look at our parliament, self-evidently, our current parliament is not reflective of the community it should represent. And this hurts us because it results in a democratic deficit that fails us all. And so change is absolutely required. We are talking about making policies. We're talking about implementing decisions that are going to impact a diverse range of people in our multicultural society. And when you have those voices missing at the table, how are you going to ensure that no one slips through the cracks? How are you going to ensure that no one is reduced to a non-entity? Going to avoid the rippling impact it's going to have on everyone else who can sit there and feel that it's not going to hurt them, but it will do. So I have spoken in the past about the need where we're not in a meritocracy. We don't live in a meritocracy. That's why I have spoken in the past for a need for us to need to force some policies through. And that's why I believe so much in things like quotas, which I know, having spoken to Andrew Bowie's colleague, Alexander Burnett, the Conservatives don't believe in quotas. And when I've spoken about gender quotas in the past in particular, that they'd rather tackle the root causes of inequality. Well, I'd say start from the decision making, because that's where the problem actually starts. When you're having people who are far removed from the country's problems, who are far removed from the country issues, making these decisions, how on earth are they going to know exactly what to do? So pushing things like quotas, putting a lot of the pressure on political parties to ensure that we do have a representative parliament, because I always say it's within the power of parties to ensure that parliament looks like the country it represents. And across society, across different sectors, ensure that we are drawing upon the widest pool of talent. And that is not hard and it's not controversial to make society more inclusive. I think there's just reluctance to do so. And the reluctance comes from pushing policies that some people fear are controversial. Well, actually they're not. There is a lot of discussion to have, and we must remain in this discussion to ensure that we're doing everything we can to draw upon every aspect of society, making sure we can still have the best people at the table, but it can be representative at the same time. And that ensures that no one's left behind.
Thank you very much for that, Fatima. So for Molly, how do you think that we can keep areas like Aberdeenshire and the Highlands and Islands accessible for young people, for example, with jobs and transport?
That's a big question. I don't want to go on for too long, but I think the top lines of it is, one, we need a really, really holistic approach to this. There's not one simple fix. And, you know, there's talk of depopulation and repopulation. Well, firstly, I'd like to stem the depopulation before we even think about repopulating and bringing more people in. So, you know, for example, the Scottish government a specific type of visa for people who will come and live in the Highlands and Islands. And I would argue that that's not the right approach at all. Of course, we want to welcome as many people in as possible, but right now we don't have the housing, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the broadband connectivity, we don't have the transport connectivity. And the fact of the matter is that people in this area, young people, are having to travel away and move away to have jobs in places like the Central Belt and further afield. And that's obviously a very unsustainable situation. And if we look at the depopulation statistics that we're expecting in the next 20 years, it's devastating. Is like Caithness and Sutherland. And so I would argue that the Scottish Government has a real role to play here in investing in things like renewables, but investing in a way that provides benefit to the community. And I think that's a point that Neil has made as well, is that, you know, we've got people in the Highlands and Islands living in sight of wind farms, and they're in fuel poverty because the way that our energy system works is not working for local people and host communities. So that, I think that is a real key piece of the problem. Building things like affordable housing, tackling second homes, where in some communities they are just running rife, and we're approaching, almost empty villages in parts of the Highlands and Islands because so many of them have been bought up by people who do not live in the community. This is really important. So I think land reform has to come into it. Local taxation changes have to come into it as well. We mentioned business rates, but I think also some sort of land value tax would be helpful, and taxing second homes properly would also be useful. So there's a number of different things, there's a number of different avenues, but ultimately I think it comes down to housing, investing in jobs, investing in local services, removing centralisation has been really, really damaging, and making sure that things like broadband connectivity and transport connectivity are, sustainable for the future.
Thank you very much for that, Molly. And finally, for Emma, as a candidate for the Highlands and Islands, how important do you think teaching Gaelic is in schools? All right, if we're not able to fix the unmuting, then I might just say thank you very much to everyone who's spoken tonight. It's been a fantastic debate, really well-rounded and spirited. My first experience of Aberdeen Debater was the 169th Earl Marischal debate, and I'm absolutely honoured to have ended up hosting the 172nd. So thank you very much, everyone. And before we go, I'd like to pass on to Jamie for a farewell word.
Thank you, Ross. As I said at the beginning of my speech, for hosting this evening. Thank you obviously to Council for helping out, but also thank you to politicians. I really don't think you guys understand how much it means when you come to debater events or any university events. It really, really does improve the quality of debate, the evening, and the atmosphere. I know Jack, Fian, George, myself, Matthew, and Ross have been organising this as well as other things throughout the year. I'd like to say thank you to all of them for helping this evening. Thank you to the Council at large. We have our AGM on the 8th of April at 7 o'clock. But yeah, I'd like to say it's been a really, really good year, especially for when we haven't actually seen each other. The fact that we're still going strong as a society that gets 30 plus people attending Zoom meetings is hardly the 60 we had in the room before. But then again, under the circumstances, I think we've done really, really well. I'm really, really proud of Debater this year. So I'd say thank you very much to Debater, to the students who still come along, and to all the people who come to events like this. It really, really does mean a lot. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to everyone. And thank you to you in the audience for watching us. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much and see you in the next academic year.